welcome to EHA Unplugged, the official podcast channel of the European Hematology Association, EHA.
Hello, I am Isabel Olivera, your host for EHA. Today we have the privilege of interviewing Professor Elizabeth Macintyre, a past president of EHA and the present president of the Biomedical Alliance in Europe. She's a full hematology professor at Université Paris Cité, where she headed the diagnostic hematology at Necker Enfants Malades Hospital. In this episode, we'll explore her career in hematology, her involvement with EHA and the Biomedical Alliance work she's been doing, and her vision for the future of the hematology field. Thank you very much for being with us today.
And thank you very much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, Professor Macintyre, can you share first what initially motivated you to pursue a career in hematology?
When I went to medical school, my family, who are farmers from the north of Scotland, thought I was going to become a general practitioner in the north of Scotland. So if anyone had said to me that I was going to become a hematologist in Paris, I would have fallen off my seat. So anyway, I went to medical school in the north of England, in Newcastle upon Tyne, and knew which specialties I didn't want to do. So it then became, I think, a process of exclusion and also of the people that inspired me. And I think that point is important because if we have hematology teachers and mentors who inspire us, or we have medical teachers and mentors that inspire us, we're more likely to choose that specialty. So anyway, I did internal medicine as everybody in British training. That's the way to get into hematology. And so once I'd done my 2 years of internal medicine, I chose hematology and then moved from the northeast of England to London, to University College in University London. I did both clinical and diagnostic hematology because that's the way the British training program works. And I thought I was going to spend the rest of my life working as a practicing clinical hematologist in the United Kingdom. But then I did a little bit of research, translational research, and I wanted to learn to speak French. So I told my boss in London I was going to Paris for a year to learn to speak French, and then I would come back and start working again in the United Kingdom. And as soon as I got to France, I liked it there, so I stayed a bit longer and I did a master's, and also I met my now French husband, who's also a hematologist, and to cut a long and exciting story short, I came back to London, finished my clinical training, and then we both went to Harvard in Boston in the early 90s, and then the stars were aligned and somebody offered me a job in Paris. I knew nothing about the French hematology system. I sort of naively presumed it was the British one, and I was lucky enough to get a chance to set up diagnostic hematology in a new department at Necker Enfants Malades Hospital in what is now Université Paris Cité. Now, I thought I was coming to do clinical and laboratory hematology because I didn't know that you could just do laboratory hematology or diagnostic hematology. Would I have applied for such a job if I'd known that that's what I was going to be doing? I don't know, but anyway, I soon discovered that there was a lot to do in setting up a diagnostic hematological malignancies service. And that there's no way I could have developed it with the same energy if I'd been in the clinic, on the wards, and been trying to develop diagnostic hematology at 7 o'clock in the evening when I was exhausted after all my clinical duties. I've worked in Necker Enfants Malades ever since. I was lucky enough to work in a healthcare system that has generous funding. It's maybe not always seems that way from the inside, but I think we've been very lucky in France in that we have been able to do innovative diagnostics for hematological malignancies. And I became head of department for the laboratory and worked closely with the both the local clinical teams in the hospital, but increasingly with the clinical cooperative groups, which are very important actors in French hemonc practice. So I was lucky enough, also somewhat paradoxically, to work in adult hematology as an adult trained internist and hematologist, but in a pediatric hospital, and some pediatricians not from our hospital, because there was little and progressively no hemonc in our hospital, but one of the other Paris hospitals, Trousseau Hospital, and Guy Léverger's team asked us to work with them on minimal residual disease management of children with hematological malignancies. And so we've worked at both the adult and the pediatric space, progressively more and more specialized in lymphoid malignancies. And I was also able, and I chose, to separate the benign hematology diagnostic service from the hemonc service. Now, that's not popular with everybody. Some people think in diagnostics, we should be running the whole gamut from keeping a hospital department running for the whole of hemostasis, thrombosis, the full blood counts, the 24/24, 365 hematological service that is necessary to keep operating theatres and to keep emergency rooms and to keep a hematology, to keep the hospital running, and that should be mixed in with a specialised hemonc service. But I don't think that's the way that diagnostics should be evolving in today's specialised world. So I progressively set up and separated the two departments into non-malignant and the hemonc service, and that has been, I think, a huge success for both parties. Hemonc has gone from strength to strength, maintaining and defending a cellular and a molecular approach, and progressively integrating molecular cytogenetics, and working closely with hematopathology to provide an integrated hemonc service, which I think is a very different service to patients, to the non-malignant service, which I handed over to a hemostasis and thrombosis expert who built up the non-malignant hematology service, which I don't think she would have been able to do if she'd been overshadowed by a head of department whose priority was malignant hematology. That's contested, but I think it's the right model, and my successor thinks it's the right model, and we think that model should be envisaged in other hospital departments in France. It's very close to the HMDS model, the Hematological Malignancy Diagnostic Service, that has been developed in the United Kingdom, and I think it's something that should be considered across Europe.
There have been so many advances in this time in the diagnostic procedures. The techniques have changed so much in this time. You have been instrumental also in implementing this in France and advancing this. What are your thoughts on the recent advancements and the prospects of diagnostics in hematology?
We're lucky. We're in a discipline where diagnostic innovation has been relatively easy because blood and bone marrow and lymph nodes are relatively accessible. So we're at the forefront of that development, and it's up to us to integrate those advances beyond publishing papers, but actually in the implementation phases that mean that patients benefit from it and that it's integrated into their healthcare pathway. Now, that has implications on healthcare management, on funding healthcare, funding diagnostics, and I think it also has implications for training. I don't think you can now run a diagnostic service while still doing clinical practice. I just don't think there's a space for running that on a part-time basis. Now, within Europe, hematology training tracks are slightly varied. One of the commonest tracks for clinical hematologists is to be trained in therapeutic hematology and to do some lab work and to do some translational research. I'm being simplistic, but those clinical hematologists learn some microscopy, but less and less microscopy. And there's little exposure to the flow cytometry, the molecular techniques, the molecular cytogenetics, increasingly the omics techniques. So either you think that you consider that happens in a research lab, so you do your clinical practice, somebody looks down the microscope, and you have biomedical scientists who provide the data and you integrate them all. Or you go further down that track, and that's a less common pathway, but your medically qualified hematologists will choose diagnostic hematology. Now, it's sometimes called laboratory hematology. Sometimes it's called pathology.
Okay.
In North America, it's within the pathology department, but it has various different labels, and people don't really know where it sits. So I think some people might just like to think that that all stays within the clinical hematology track, and that some clinical hematologists will become diagnostic hematologists, but without the somewhat formalized training of what it is to do hospital diagnostics, to do regulatory grade, reimbursable healthcare. Because it's not the same thing to take samples and publish a paper as to get it integrated into clinical practice. In France, and I think it's one of the rare European countries where you can become a biological hematologist. But interestingly, at European level, that is recognized as being a general laboratory hematologist or a laboratory biomedical doctor. So there are issues about recognition. There are full-time laboratory specialists who do microbiology, clinical chemistry, what else? Immunology, genetics, constitutional genetics. And then there are pathologists who look down the microscope. And then there are clinical hematologists. Now, I'm UK trained, and I'm a member of the College of Internal Physicians because I passed the exam. But as a hematologist, you become a member of the College of Pathologists. So we're somewhere between internal medicine and pathology, and you need dual skills. And we should have a sort of spectrum of training between the two of them, but we need some kind of European recognition of those training tracks.
But that's part of the problem of hematology being recognized as a specialty in itself. Is
Absolutely.
Yeah. Sometimes it's with oncology also a bit, and
Absolutely.
with internal medicine, it's difficult to situate hematology because it's so broad.
Yeah. It's a very important point, and we need to be recognized as a medical specialty in its own right within the greater family of internal medicine. That shouldn't be too complicated, and we're on track to make that work. But for the diagnostic hematologists, we have to find the right space, not just for hematology, but I think if we find the right space for hemonc, then I think that model may well be followed by other specialties, because if it's become difficult to do non-malignant and malignant hematology from a diagnostic point of view, that's also true for other organs. Probably the closest specialty would be neuro-oncology, neuropathology, and management of CNS tumours. But you could argue, do you not need nephrobiologists who would manage renal disorders? And I think these kind of issues need to be addressed. They need to be addressed as we're moving slowly towards, to call them European boards is perhaps a bit of an acceleration, but European recognition of we have our European curriculum in hematology. We have our exam. One day we will have boards, I think. At the moment, we're on how does each member state want to recognise these training tracks. So it's an interesting space, and I think we're a bit of a proof of principle for how we manage an increasingly specialised diagnostic process in cancer.
I imagine then you don't see patients.
No, I don't see patients. I see their samples.
You miss that?
Personally, no. I would miss it if I didn't have the contact with the clinical cooperative groups. And I think you need to feel that what you're doing is useful. But there are different ways of improving survival curves. And I think we have contributed to improving survival curves. I've avoided the issue that we can see in clinicians who've been giving chemotherapy for 25, 30 years. It can get a little tough. And I think on the other hand, my job is as if I were a medical scientist, but I get paid as a doctor and I do some teaching. And I think I have a very nice life as it happens as a woman. I've been able to bring up my children. I've been able to contribute to managing a range of not very pleasant diseases. And I've been able to generate understanding and to publish at an age when it was terribly exciting to publish. And once you've got your H index up to being reasonable, then you say, well, what's the next step? And where I am in my career now, I'd like to see young people choosing our discipline, because there are many ways of doing hematology, and there's probably a right way of doing hematology for everybody who wants to work in a discipline that is right at the interface of understanding pathophysiology and exploiting it for therapeutic intent.
How did you get into EHA, and what has it meant to you during your career?
I can't remember how I got into the EHA. I think I was probably asked to review abstracts, and then I joined the SPC quite a long time ago now. Then I got into the Fellowship and Grants Committee, and then I applied for the board. I didn't get elected. David Grimwade did, and I applied again, and I joined the board in 2015. I'm a trans-European. I get the codes in European medical politics because I'm a native English speaker, and because I understand British culture, and I've learnt to understand and love French culture, and I just love the European space. And if you love something, you'll always do it better. And I loved being EHA president. I thought it was a real treat. I can't think of any more constructive element in building European confidence than to be able to share some common ground from Turkey to Portugal, because we share the same diseases. We've got something in common. And if we've got, and that something in common goes across many linguistic boundaries. And I've just found it such a constructive space at a time when there's rising nationalism. I think the potential for European medical societies and European societies in general to build confidence across borders is just priceless.
Yeah, and demonstrate the value of cooperation and of being together.
Yeah.
So now you're the president of the Biomedical Alliance. What are your main goals there? What are you doing?
Well, it's an extension of the same thing. It was EHA that asked me to represent EHA at Biomedical Alliance, and for various reasons, I quickly joined the board and then became president at the beginning of 2024. Biomed Alliance is a really smart association of now 35 medical specialties, European medical specialties. We don't have individual members, which was created by 4 really smart specialties that there was cardiology, one of the cancers, diabetes and respiratory, who realized that we need to speak with a common voice if we want to be heard by lawmakers and decision makers and policy makers at the European Parliament and the European Commission. And those 4 societies created the Biomedical Alliance. Recently, it was in 2010. And little by little, more and more societies realized that obviously we're only going to deal with transversal issues. We will never deal with something that is just cancer or just vaccines or just infectious diseases. But there are so many transversal issues. And one thing that I think it's important to realize that in a functioning democracy, the government and the lawmakers listen to advocates. And there are broadly 3 categories of advocates in the medical world. There's industry, who have very, very professional advocates who are very, very closely linked to the Parliament and the Commission. There are patient advocates who are becoming exceedingly professional and are very good advocates, and understandably politicians listen to them. And then there are the medical specialists, and we are not trained to be advocates, and we're trained to be specialists. So we talk about very specialised things, and often policy officers and lawmakers and politicians don't understand us. And sometimes we neutralise each other out because we're all talking about such specialised topics. So we have to have people who know how to advocate, how to do advocacy for the role of healthcare professionals, and we represent doctors and biomedical scientists. We're not a union. We're not there to defend doctors' rights. We're there to make sure that the voice of biomedical research and medical practice is heard when the laws are being written or when they're in their implementing phases. And for that, you need to learn to talk clearly, to give clear messages, and to be constructive in a multi-stakeholder format. And nobody teaches you that at medical school, and nobody teaches you that when you're going through your specialty training. And most eminent professors are not advocates. So what do? We either depend on public health doctors to be our advocates. And it's very important that there are public health specialists, epidemiologists, statisticians, but they can't understand the whole of medical practice. So at Biomed Alliance, we believe that we need a small number of, you could call us implementation scientists or regulatory scientists, who have enough background and experience to represent our specialty, and who've had enough experience to then go on and say, how can we make sure that the laws that are coming out in the European health space are fit for purpose. And it's better to be at the table while we're designing them rather than complaining about them because we were absent when we were designing them. So we like to think we're constructive helpers to the European Commission, the European Parliament, and its policy officers and lawmakers.
So you are a bit out of your comfort zone because you're in a space that is not natural again to a medical doctor.
I think I'd say it's a new space. I couldn't have done it when I was 35, but it's a good space for me now. I'm almost at the end of my career. I'll retire in a few years, and it's a space I like. And if you like being in a space, then you're better at it.
Well, I see that you have enjoyed each one of those spaces where you have been or where you are or still, and it is fascinating to hear how you have advanced during your career and where you're at, and good luck with this step. Thank you very much, Professor Macintyre, for sharing your unique experience with us. Thank you to all of you for tuning in. and see you next time.